The mermaid of the traveling show never swam in an ocean, only in a basin barely big enough for a child. People paid good money to see a marvel, but they never saw the cold iron of the wagon lock, nor the damp chill that seeped into a body come nightfall. Her very freedom, her right to simply be without a crowd, was always at risk. Tonight, I'll show you how a woman, given nothing but a cage, learned to move mountains. What good is beauty when it's bought and sold like cattle? I remember this old piece of paper right here. The narrator gently taps a faded, brittle railway manifest tucked into an ancient leather ledger. It tells a story, though not the one folks paid to hear. My old hands, they remember the feel of paper like this, thin as a promise and just as easy to tear. She was called the scaled siren, but in truth, she was just a woman, born with skin like the finest fish, all shimmering and tight. They kept her in a big, round basin made of painted tin, and it was her whole world for a time. That first wagon, I reckon, was barely more than a shed on wheels. It rattled and groaned on a desolate railway siding late at night, the kind of place where the wind just whistles through the cracks and carries off any sound of a human breath. You could hear the heavy wooden wheels of that transport wagon, though they weren't moving then, just settling deeper into the cold earth. The dim light from a faraway signal lamp barely found its way inside, just enough to show the damp, cold iron of the lock on the door. It was always there, that lock, a constant reminder of who owned her journey and who owned her very breath. They called her live cargo on the manifests, no different than a prize hog or a shipment of horses, and that was just how life was for her. Her privacy, her comfort, they were stripped away by the rattling of those heavy wheels, by the silence of those forgotten tracks. She'd lie there, I suppose, and just listen to the quiet that tasted of dust and abandonment. My own eyes, they ain't what they used to be, but I can still see that dim wagon, feel the chill in the air. This old ledger, it's got a way of bringing it all back, like a smell caught on the wind. She was just a body then, moving from one place to another, at the whim of others. She didn't know the names of the towns, not really, just the feel of the tracks beneath her, and the way the wagon stopped and started. She was just a part of the railway system, a small, strange package in a world that moved by iron and steam, experiencing its arbitrary nature firsthand. The silence of that abandoned siding would stretch and stretch, long past the last rumble of a passing train, leaving her to wonder if anyone, anywhere, even remembered she was there at all. The mermaid of the traveling show never swam in an ocean, only in a basin barely big enough for a child. People paid to see a marvel, but they never saw the cold iron of the wagon lock. Her very freedom, her right to simply be without a crowd, was at risk. Tonight, I'll show you how a woman, given nothing but a cage, learned to move mountains. What good is beauty when it's bought and sold like cattle? Lord, it's been so long since I saw a real circus wagon, not like the pictures folks draw now. She had to breathe, you know, just like you and me. They dressed her up fine, but it was all just a show to hide the truth of her days. Inside the big tent, the gas lamps hissed and spit, throwing a harsh yellow light on everything. It wasn't a kind light. It had a way of making folks look like painted dolls, all false smiles and bright colors. For the scale siren, it meant another layer of that cheap grease paint, thick and sticky over her skin. It felt like a mask, I reckon, not just a covering. She could feel it pull around her eyes, a heavy second skin that wasn't her own. Below her, the basin was filled with lukewarm water, barely enough to cover her knees. The sour smell of damp sawdust rose from the floorboards, a constant companion to the rattle of the tent ropes. She could hear the muffled shouts of the roustabouts, the creak of the wooden benches being set, the distant bleating of some poor goat. It was a whole world moving around her, a world she was part of but never truly in. They called her a wonder, a creature from the deep, but she was just a woman trying to keep her skin from drying out. She watched the shadows dance on the canvas walls. Every movement, every rustle, every voice carried a rhythm. The way the canvas flapped when a strong gust hit, the precise tug of the ropes, the heavy boots of the men carrying props. It was all a pattern. She saw the managers bustling about, their faces tight with numbers and schedules. They were always talking about routes, about the next town, about how much time they had before the next train. She heard the words, even if she didn't know their meaning yet. It was just noise, then, but she listened all the same. She had to. The air grew heavy with the smell of lamp oil and the sweat of the crowd pressing in. I can still taste it sometimes, when the wind blows just right through these old floorboards. It was a smell that promised spectacle, but delivered only a kind of tired desperation. She knew that smell. The barker's voice, booming and thick with promises, started up at the front of the tent. He was telling tales of the sea, of mermaids and magic, painting a picture that had nothing to do with the woman sitting in a shallow basin, feeling the sticky grease paint on her face. Her gaze, though, wasn't on the crowd gathering. It lingered on the big canvas flap that served as the tent door, and beyond it, she knew, sat the dark shape of her wagon, already dreading the next journey. The sun beat down like a blacksmith's hammer on the top of her wagon, out here on another forgotten piece of track. It was hotter than a sinner in July, and the air shimmered off the rails like a bad dream. The big wooden wheels, they sat still, baked hard into the dry earth. Inside, the world was a study in thirst. The canvas of her wagon tent, it felt cold and clammy to the touch, but it offered no real comfort against the heat that seeped in from everywhere. It just held the stale air close, like a shroud. She lay in her basin. What little water was left in it had grown warm and thick, barely covering her. The wood of the basin itself, it was parched and cracked, thirsty for a good soaking, just like she was. Her scales, usually slick and shimmering, felt tight, almost stiff. She knew what this meant. They were leaving her to bake out here, far from any town, far from any help. It was a cruel kind of waiting, a way to make a body weak and willing. This wasn't just bad luck. She understood that now. This was a plan. Her special needs, the very thing that made her the living mermaid and brought folks to stare, they were being turned against her, the manager. He knew she couldn't just get up and walk to the nearest creek. He knew she needed her water, and he knew how to make her pay for it. He meant to dry her out until she'd sign anything, agree to any new terms, just for the feel of cool water on her skin. It's a strange thing, I reckon, how a person's very nature can be used like a chain. What keeps you alive can also be the thing that binds you tightest. It had a way of showing you just how small you were in their grand scheme. But she wasn't just feeling the thirst. She was feeling the reason for it, deep in her bones. She was learning that her special needs, while a burden, were also a puzzle for them. If they didn't keep her alive and well, they had no show, no mermaid, no money. The silence out on that side and stretched long, broken only by the buzz of flies and the distant, lonely cry of a hawk. Then a shadow, long and dark, fell across the wagon entrance, cutting off the last sliver of afternoon sun. It was the manager, all right, and in his big, rough hand, she could already see the crisp, folded edges of a new, harsher contract. The sun was setting low, I reckon, painting the sky like a bruised peach over the railway platform. Her wagon, it wasn't the star here. It was just another heavy box, waiting to be shunted onto some new train. All around, the air was thick with the smell of coal smoke and wet earth, and the clang of metal on metal kept a steady, tired beat. Folks were hurrying, shouting, their voices swallowed by the great rumble of the engines. The scaled siren, she lay in her basin, though it wasn't her performance time. She was meant to be kept quiet, out of sight, until the lights came up. But her eyes, they were always working. They took in the men with their lanterns, the way they checked the couplings, the quick nods they gave each other. And then there was that sound, a sharp, rhythmic tapping that came from the station house like a busy cricket. That was the telegraph key, sending its messages across the wires, carrying news that she had no right to hear. She was clever, you see, not just pretty. She knew how to listen. I closed my eyes for a moment, a faint smile on my lips, remembering the sound, those old train whistles. They carried more than just sound across the country. They carried secrets, too, for those who knew how to hear them. She couldn't ask outright, couldn't risk a word. The manager, he had eyes everywhere, and a sharp tongue for disobedience, but she watched. She watched the way the guard, a man with a beard like a bramble bush and hands made for hauling, moved among the wagons. He had big, rough hands from all the work, I reckon. He came near her wagon, checking the lock on the big door, his lamp swinging low. The damp, cold iron of that lock, she knew its feel well enough. He paused, maybe to catch his breath, and his gaze, just for a flicker, fell to the crack where the canvas of her wagon tent didn't quite meet the wood. She held still, barely breathing, but her eyes, they were wide and clear, holding a question that didn't need words. It was a gamble, a big one. If he saw only the mermaid, he'd likely just turn away, or worse, report her peeking. But if he saw a person, a soul in a different kind of trap. The rhythmic clatter of the telegraph key seemed to speed up, urgent and brittle. The guard's eyes met hers for a fleeting second, a hint of understanding passing between them before he turned away, his rough, calloused hand reaching into his pocket. He didn't say a word, just moved on, like he was still checking the wagons. But a moment later, a small, folded paper, no bigger than a bird's wing, lay in her basin, damp from the splash. A body can be held in a cage, I reckon, but a mind, well, that's a different kind of wild thing entirely. She knew it, deep down. That little bit of paper, that's where the real power was hid. Not in the muscle of a man or the lock, on a door. It was like a secret map, that manifest. Every squiggle and every number a word in a tongue only a few understood. It wasn't for school, mind you. It was for survival. She waited until the camp was quiet, until the last whisper of the night watchman faded with his lamp. Then from a hidden corner of her wagon, she pulled out the little lantern she'd managed to keep. It wasn't much, just a tin box with a wick, but it cast enough light to chase back the deep shadows that always seemed to cling to her. The smell of the lamp oil, it was a sharp, clean scent in the stuffy air, a small comfort in the stuffy air. Her fingers, still a little sticky from the cheap grease paint she'd had to wear for the show, smoothed over the crumpled paper. It was a waybill, thrown out like trash after some crates of dry goods had been unloaded. But to her, it was a treasure. The ink was smudged in places, a blur of figures where a thumb had pressed too hard, but the columns and lines were still clear enough to make sense of. She'd seen these papers before, tacked up in dusty offices or clutched in the hands of the railway men. They were full of strange words and numbers, a whole language about what went where and when, and how much it weighed. Her own name, or rather her circus name, would show up on papers like these, right next to special cargo or live goods. It was a cold truth, seeing herself listed like a bale of cotton or a crate of chickens. It's a hard thing to see yourself as just an item, a number on a ledger. Lord, it's been so long since I thought on such things. But she never let it break her spirit. No, she just watched. She listened. She learned. And now, in the flickering glow of that stolen lantern, she was piecing it all together. Every column, every row, every code. It was like learning the very bones of the railway, how it moved, how it breathed. Her gaze moved from the smudged waybill to a collection of other scraps she'd gathered. Old tickets, torn schedules, even a discarded list of station names. She'd laid them out on the floor of her wagon, making her own sort of map. The lantern light danced across the complex tables of numbers, making them seem to shift and swim, but her eyes held steady. She was looking for patterns, for the hidden rules that governed the movement of every single car, including her own. What she was doing was dangerous, a secret act. If the manager, with his sharp eyes and even sharper tongue, ever found her like this, poring over these forbidden papers, there'd be hell to pay. He'd find a way to make her life even harder, to tighten the chains she already felt so keenly. But the risk felt small compared to the promise of understanding. She traced a finger along a series of numbers that seemed to repeat, noting the same routing codes for goods marked perishable or fragile. She was special cargo, after all, needing certain conditions. She was beginning to see how her own affliction, the very thing that made her a spectacle, also tied her to a specific kind of transport, a kind that followed its own rules, rules that could perhaps be bent or even broken. A faint scratching sound from outside her wagon suddenly cut through the quiet. It was soft, like a twig dragging across the wood, or perhaps something else entirely. Her breath caught in her throat. Her heart gave a sudden hard thump against her ribs. With a swift, practiced movement, she doused the lantern, plunging the wagon into near darkness. She clutched the waybill tight, holding it close to her chest, listening with every fiber of her being. The wagon had stopped again, but this time it wasn't quiet. Lord, it was the kind of place where the very air tasted of iron and hot oil. She could hear the rumble deep in the ground, making the wooden floor beneath her shift and groan like a tired old man. This wasn't no desolate siding. This was the heart of it all. A great big knot of steel tracks and smoking engines. The gritty dust of the train yard blew across her face, even through the cracks in the wagon walls. It tasted like ash and grit, coating her lips and settling on her scales. All around her, The world was a tangle of sound, sharp whistles cutting through the air, the roar of steam, and the distant, methodical clang of a shunting engine. It was a language she was starting to learn, the talk of the tracks. But here it was just too much, like trying to hear a single voice in a whole town square. She pressed her face to a narrow gap, her eyes wide as saucers, trying to make sense of the endless lines of steel. Engines big as houses moved back and forth, pushing and pulling strings of wagons. Some were full of lumber, some of cotton bales, and some were just empty, waiting for a load. She saw it all, clear as day. The whole country laid out in lines of steel. It took a sharp mind to make sense of all that chaos, to see the pattern in the rumble and the smoke, and she was trying. Lord, she was surely trying. Her head swam with it, the sheer size of the place. It made her feel smaller than a beetle, just another piece of cargo to be pushed from here to there. It was like a giant spider web, and she was caught right in the middle, watching the spider spin its threads. How could one person ever hope to understand all this, much less fight against it? It had a way of making a body feel helpless, just seeing the sheer scale of the thing. A train rumbled past then, close enough to shake her whole wagon. It was a long freight, full of closed boxes and slatted crates. On one of the wagons, plain as day, she saw a sign painted rough and bold, Special Livestock. It made her wonder, as that train clattered on down the line, if her own fate was truly different from the beasts caged within. She sat there in the rattling wagon, the air thick with the smell of damp canvas and stale straw. Lord, that wagon had a way of rocking, a kind of lullaby that never brought peace. Her hands, they moved slow and careful over a piece of packing paper, rough and brown, that she'd smoothed out on her lap. On it, she'd scratched out lines with a burnt stick, a map that wasn't for finding buried treasure, but for finding her own way. She knew the rhythm of the rails now, the way a mother knows the heartbeat of her child. The persistent squeak of this wagon wheel, it was different from the last one, and she had come to know its tune like a sad old song. She'd learned to tell a curve from a straight stretch just by the way the light shifted through the cracks, or the way the water in her basin sloshed. She could almost feel the tracks themselves, stretching out under the country, carrying her from one place where folks paid to stare to another. My own memory, it ain't what it used to be. But some things, they just stick with you, like the way she used to trace those lines. She wasn't just drawing lines, you see. She was drawing her way out. She was putting together the puzzle of the world outside her cage, piece by rattling piece. She saw how the big trains moved, the ones that carried cotton and timber, and how her small wagon, with its special markings, fit into that grand grinding machine. She knew where the sidings were, the lonely places where they'd leave her for days, sometimes when it suited their purpose. She knew the names of the towns they passed, even if she never saw them, just heard the distant whistles fading. It gave her a strange kind of hope, this knowledge, like a tiny spark in a dark room. But with that hope came a colder understanding, a dangerous truth. She knew why they left her, how they used her needs against her. She wasn't just cargo, she was a tool, made to agree to whatever they put in front of her. The realization was a heavy stone in her stomach, making her want to break free more than ever before. The wagon hit a sharp bump, a sudden jolt that made the lantern swing wild. Then, just as quickly, the familiar rumble of the wheels faded, replaced by an ominous silence. It wasn't the quiet of a stopped train at a bustling station. No, this was the deep, empty quiet of a place forgotten. She knew this siding. The sun beat down again, hard and mean, on that same forgotten stretch of track. It was the kind of heat that made the air shimmer above the rails and the wood of her wagon creak in protest. She knew this siding now, knew the way the crickets sang louder here, how the wind smelled of dry dust and far-off pine. It was the manager's favorite trick, leaving her here, parched and alone, until the thirst got so bad she'd sign anything. He came then, his shadow long and thin in the afternoon glare, just as he always did. His boots crunched on the gravel, a sound that used to make her heart jump with a kind of fear she couldn't name. In his hand, he held a paper, crisp and new, rustling softly in the still air. Another contract, no doubt, binding her tighter to the circus, to the basin, to the endless, rattling journeys. He looked pleased with himself, a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Well now, little fish," he said, his voice slick as lamp oil. "Ready to get moving again? Got a good crowd waiting, further south." He held out the contract, the ink still smelling fresh, promising more shows, more weeks, more of the same lonely travel. She looked at the paper, then at him. Her scales, usually dulled by the dry air, seemed to catch a glint of the sunlight like tiny, hard jewels. She had spent these last lonely days not just suffering, but watching, listening. The rhythmic clatter of the telegraph, the distant whistles carrying different tunes, the way the wagons were sorted and shoved. She had learned how her own special needs, the very thing that made her the living mermaid, were also a burden to them, a knot in their neat little plans. They needed to move her carefully, to keep her alive, and that need was a kind of lever. What happens when the thing that keeps you alive is also the thing that binds you? She knew the answer. Lord, but knowing the answer ain't the same as changing it, not yet, anyway. Her gaze drifted from the contract to the small hidden pouch tucked beneath the rim of her basin, out of sight. Inside it, she kept the smudged scraps of paper, the numbers, the crude maps she'd been drawing in the dark. She hadn't been idle, not while the sun baked her wagon and her throat felt like sand. She had been thinking, piecing together the great steel puzzle of the tracks. "Before I sign," she said, her voice a little dry but steady, "could you tell me something about the next train's manifest? Just the number of the wagon behind mine, if it's not too much trouble." The manager's smile faltered, just for a breath. He wasn't used to her asking questions like that. He was used to her thirst and her quiet, tired obedience. Lord, it's a strange thing, ain't it, how folks measure power. The ones who shout and stomp and make a show of it, they think they hold it all. But I reckon the real power, it belongs to them that just listen. She had learned that truth better than anyone, that scaled surrender. She found a way to read the silence of a place, to hear the trains that weren't even there yet, just by seeing the marks left behind. Of an evening, after the last worker had gone and the station lamps grew dim, she'd slip from her wagon. Not a sound, mind you, just a whisper of movement, like wind through dry leaves. The small railway office, always left open for a spell, was a treasure trove to her. A flickering oil lamp sat on a cluttered desk, casting long, dancing shadows across papers piled high. It smelled of old ink and coal dust, a smell of promises and journeys. Her eyes, sharp as a hawk's, went straight for the stack of official railway timetables. She knew the risk, oh Lord, she knew it. Being caught here, it would mean worse than just a scolding. It could mean a colder wagon, a longer wait for water, a tighter chain on her days. But the hunger to know, it was a fire in her belly, hotter than any gas lamp. She didn't just look at the numbers, she felt them, tracing the lines with a finger that knew the feel of rough scales. Each page, each column, it told a story of where things were meant to go and when. She compared them to the waybills she'd seen, the scraps she'd hidden away. She was building a picture in her mind, a great big map of iron and steam, all laid out in black ink on thin paper. The quiet of the office was broken only by the soft turning of pages and the distant, lonely cry of a train far off in the night. She worked with a calm that belied the danger, her mind humming with dates and destinations. It was a language she was learning, a secret code that spoke of routes and sidings, of delays and connections. And then her finger stopped, right there, on a line for her own scheduled route, a small thing, barely a smudge, a time that didn't match, a station that was missing from another page, a tiny crack in the great big wall of how things were supposed to be. The wagon smelled of damp sawdust, always. It was a smell that clung to her scales, mixed with the faint, sweet scent of the oil they used to keep her skin shining for the crowd. She sat on the edge of her basin, not yet filled, the rough canvas of her costume laid out beside her. Her hands, usually so graceful when she mimed swimming for the gawking folks, now traced lines on a small piece of wood. It was just a scrap, pulled from a broken crate, but on it she had scratched out a map, not of oceans or distant lands, but of railway junctions, of sidings and main lines, of the places where trains split off like rivers finding new paths. Her mind was far from the gas lamps that would soon glare down on her. It was on the cold iron tracks, on the schedule she had seen in the station office, and on the way her own wagon, marked a special cargo, was always handled. She knew how they hooked her up, usually close to the engine, so the water could be fetched easy for her basin. It made sense to them. It made her a prisoner to their routine. Once you see the threads, how long can you resist pulling them? That's what I always wondered. She wasn't just a passenger anymore. She was starting to see herself as a part of the engine, a cog in the machine that she could influence. She looked at her diagram, her finger lingering on a particular junction, a place where the main line split and a smaller spur went north, far from their usual southern route. Her special cargo status meant her wagon was always given a certain priority, a specific spot. What if that priority could be turned on its head? What if a simple request, made to seem like a comfort for her act, could change her whole journey? It was a risk, a big one. If the manager saw through it, her days would get even harder. But the thought of another abandoned siding, another parched day, made her stomach clench. The manager's heavy footsteps sounded outside, then the rattle of the latch. He pushed the canvas flap aside, his shadow filling the doorway, his face already set for the night's profits. He carried a small lantern, its light flickering across the damp sawdust. "Ready, siren?" he grunted, not really asking, just stating. "Crowd's getting restless." She turned, her face calm, though her heart beat like a trapped bird. "Almost, sir," she said, her voice soft, like water over stones. Only, could my wagon be placed a bit differently tonight? Near the very end of the train, perhaps? The vibrations from the engine, they make my scales feel restless. It would help my performance greatly, I reckon. Less jostle, more grace for the crowd. The manager frowned, thinking on it. It seemed like a small thing, a bit of foolishness from the mermaid, but no harm in it. Might even make her put on a better show. Very well, he said, waving a dismissive hand. But don't delay. The show waits for no one. She nodded, a small, knowing glint in her eyes, already picturing how that small thing would change everything. She didn't just understand the system. She understood the people who ran it, the ones who wanted to do their job, and the ones who just wanted to get home. It was always about understanding what folks truly wanted, wasn't it? The marshalling yard was a place of iron and steam, all noise and muscle under the weak lamps of evening. Wagons groaned and clanked, their heavy wooden bodies rattling like bones in a sack. The shunting engine, a squat black beast, let out a mournful whistle that echoed off the stacked lumber and freight cars. Sparks flew from its wheels as it pushed and pulled, sorting the long lines of cargo. The air hung thick with the smell of coal smoke and wet earth, a bitter taste on the tongue. The cold iron of the coupling links rang out with every hard bump. Inside her own wagon, the scaled siren sat quiet, listening to every clang. She knew the rhythm of this place, the rough language of the tracks. Her basin was still damp with cool water, not the hot, brackish stuff from the last siding. She watched through a crack in the wagon wall, seeing the rough men in their overalls, their faces smudged with grease, their movements practiced and tired. One of them, a big fellow with a red bandana, was directing the shunting engine with hand signals, his voice rough as he called out to his crew. Her wagon was meant for the southbound train. That was the plan the manager had laid out. She knew this from the manifests she'd studied, from the whispers she'd caught. But she had a different plan. When the big man came near her wagon, checking the coupling, she spoke, her voice soft but clear, barely rising above the din. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her words a little hesitant like she was shy. "My scales, they get so dry in the heat. And that water tower over there, the one by the northbound track, it always seems to have the freshest water. Would it be too much trouble, I wonder, if my wagon could be placed closer to it, just for a little while, before the long journey begins?" The man stopped, blinking at the unexpected voice from the mermaid's wagon. He scratched his chin, looking from her wagon to the distant water tower. It was a small request, a peculiar one, but her wagon was marked special cargo, and everyone knew that meant extra fuss. And he was tired. He just wanted to finish his shift and go home. "Right then, miss," he grumbled, his voice like gravel. "A bit of extra work, but I reckon we can manage. Don't want the mermaid drying out, do we?" He turned, waving his arm towards the shunting engine, giving a new set of signals. The engine let out another whistle, a sharper, more purposeful sound this time. She felt the jolt as her wagon was uncoupled, then the slow, grinding lurch as it began to move, not towards the southbound track, but steadily, deliberately, across the yard. The cold iron of the coupling links rattled, then clanged shut with a final, heavy thud. The sound was different now, the rhythm of a new train heading in a new direction. Her wagon, instead of joining the expected southbound train, was coupled to a northbound freight, just as she had subtly nudged it to be. The wagon rolled on, and the sound of its wheels, that old familiar clatter, had a new tune to it now. It wasn't the slow, dragging groan of a discarded car, nor the hurried jolt of a train rushing to its planned stop. No, this was a steady, purposeful rhythm, like a heart beating strong and true. Through the small gaps in the canvas, the scaled siren could see the faint, distant lights of an unfamiliar town twinkling like scattered embers. They were not the lights she'd been meant to see, not the ones on the southbound route. And that, I reckon, was the Lord's truth of it. She wasn't free, not yet. Lord, no. A cage on a different track is still a cage after all. But she was moving in a direction they hadn't planned for her. That's a kind of freedom, I reckon, the secret kind, the kind you hold close, like a warm stone in your pocket, the kind that lets you breathe a bit deeper, knowing you'd bent the iron just a little. She lay there, feeling the rumble beneath her, and she could almost taste the salt air that wasn't there, a promise of something far away. My old hands, they've seen so many things come and go, so many lives lived out on lines someone else drew. I traced this faint crease on the manifest, right here, and I can almost feel the dust that settled on her skin, the dust of a journey that was her own doing. She wasn't just a passenger anymore. She was starting to see herself as a part of the engine, a cog in the machine that she could influence. It wasn't just about escaping the manager's grasp for a spell. It was about truly understanding the whole contraption, from the smallest bolt to the longest stretch of steel. She knew that this little victory, this unexpected journey, was just the first step. It gave her precious time, a respite from the manager's immediate spite, but it demanded a larger strategy for true liberation. By the flickering light of her stolen lantern, she pulled out the dusty piece of packing paper. It was her map, crudely drawn, all lines and junctions and scribbled notes. And as the wagon rolled on, carrying her away from where she was supposed to be, she began to sketch new lines, not just of where she was now, or where she had been, but of where she intended to go. She drew them with a steady hand, lines that crisscrossed the whole country, each one a step toward a future she would build for herself. I close this old ledger now, the brittle paper rustling like dry leaves. The narrator gently runs a gnarled finger over the faded railway manifest, then slowly closes the heavy leather-bound book with a soft thud. It doesn't tell you the whole story, you see. It only shows the tracks. But she knew how to read between the lines, and that, my dear, made all the difference.